Hi, welcome to helpyourmath.com. So today we have a special formula that we're going to use to solve all these four problems. So as you can see, it's negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c divided by 2 times a. So by seeing this formula, you may be thinking, what exactly are these a, b, and c terms? And to just further get into explanation on what exactly is a, b, and c, we can always remember this and try to convert it into this form with a x squared plus b x plus c is equal 0. So as you can see, let's take number 1 for example. It has a leading coefficient of a. So the leading coefficient, in other terms, what's in front of this x squared, or you could say behind it, what's behind this x squared is a 1, because always x squared, whatever is in front of it, or behind it, sorry, is an imaginary 1. And if we can take this second term, which is bx, the b can be translated as a negative 4 because it's behind this x. And the c is just a constant number. And constant in a simpler definition just means that there's just no x next to it. So that's what we're going to remember when using this formula. We have to find the leading coefficients of each term, and we plug those leading coefficients into this formula to get out our output, which in this term we're trying to find and solve for x. So now that we know this, I'll just write this up here as a side note. A x squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0. And we're always going to use this later on to solve 4 of these problems. So in this problem, we already know that x squared minus 4x plus 4 is equal to 0. We can solve this many ways. Since we already know how to factor, we can solve this by factoring, which is just x minus 2, x minus 2. So in other words, this is one way of solving it, through factoring. But suppose we can't solve it through factoring. We could use the quadratic formula, and that could solve for the roots that we're trying to find. So let's try using the quadratic formula this way. So what we know from this is that a is equal to 1, because always this x has an imaginary 1. And that b is equal to negative 4. Because remember, in this formula, what's next to the x is this number, which is negative 4. And c is positive 4. So now that we have our a is equal 1, b is equal negative 4, and c is equal 4, all we have to do is plug these variables in and solve. So b is negative 4, so we put negative 4 plus or minus b squared, negative 4 squared, minus 4 times a is 1, times c is 4, all over 2 times a, which is a is 1. So what we know now is, let's pretend, as always, that there's an imaginary 1 here, because that's what it's insinuating. So negative 1 times negative 4, that will just give us 4. Plus negative 4 to the second power is just positive 16. Negative 4 times 1 is 4. Negative 4 times 1 is negative 4. Negative 4 times 4 is 16. All over 2. 16 minus 16 would just be 0, so this radical cancels out. And now we're just left with 4 over 2, which is this one, will equal to x. So 4 over 2 is just, in simplified terms, is just 2, which is the same thing as we solved earlier with factoring, where we got the roots, and the roots also give us 2. So let's move on to question number 2. In question number 2, we can see x squared minus 4x is equal to 7. The key principle to the quadratic formula is that we want to always get 0 on the right-hand side. So in order to do this, let's think about this. How can we get 0 on this side, but we have a 7? The same thing, we move 7 over by subtracting it, and what would be left over on the right-hand side would just be 0. So x squared minus 4x is equal to 7. Subtract 7. Subtract 7. That gives us 0. And x squared minus 4x minus 7 will give us 0. So this is now ready for us to use the quadratic formula. So it's x squared minus 4x minus 7 is equal to 0. So as we said earlier, we're trying to find these a, b, c terms. Our a, remember there's that imaginary 1 here when there's nothing. So a is 1, b is negative 4, and c is negative 7. So now we just have to plug it in again. So negative, b is negative 4, plus or minus negative 4 squared minus 4 times a is 1, times c is negative 7, all over 2 times 1, because a is 1. So now we do the math and try to compute this. Negative 1 times negative 4, which is just going to give us 4. 4 plus or minus negative 4, pretend there's a parentheses, negative 4 squared, which is 16. Negative 4 times 1 is negative 4. Negative 4 times negative 7, that will give us positive 28, all over 2. So now, as you can see, we just have to break this down even more. So, we'll just rewrite it. We'll have 4 plus or minus 16 plus 28 all over 2. Okay, now 4. So now we have 4 plus or minus radical 44 divided by 2. So now we see this radical, and we have to simplify it further. So let's just focus on this radical 44 for a minute. So in order to get this in simplified radical form, we have to see what times what will give us a common number so that we can move on the outside. So off the bat, I already know that 11 times 4 gives us 44, and 4 is 2 times 2. 2 and 2 are common, so that gets pushed on the outside of the radical, and the 11 stays inside the radical. So we can rewrite it as 4 plus or minus 2 radical 11 all over 2. However, it is still not simplified yet because we have to keep continuing and keep writing this. So what this basically means is 4 over 2 plus 2 radical 11, or 4 over 2 minus 2 radical 11. So 2 radical 11 divided by 2, 2 radical 11 divided by 2. So what we know is 4 divided by 2 is 2. 2 divided by 2 is just 1. It cancels out. So it would be 2 plus radical 11 as one answer. And here would be 2 minus radical 11 as the other answer, because this one has a plus or minus sign, so we have to take that into consideration. 4 divided by 2 is 2. Then we would just do 2 divided by 2, and that would just be an imaginary 1 that cancels out, and we would have radical 11. So this problem can also have two answers, which could be 2 plus radical 11 and 2 minus radical 11.